What happens when America's sweetheart meets daytime television's brightest star and everything goes spectacularly wrong? The tension in Studio 6B was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sandra Bullock settled into the familiar guest chair across from Kelly Clarkson. What started as a routine promotional interview for Sandra's latest project quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history. The atmosphere, warm and cheerful just minutes before, shifted the moment the cameras began rolling. Kelly greeted Sandra with her usual dazzling charisma, praising her glow and hinting that the world had noticed a new lightness in her. Sandra smiled politely, but there was a tiny flicker in her expression, barely noticeable, yet telling. Kelly leaned forward, her energy bubbling over as she pressed gently but insistently for answers. Was it the new movie? A new love interest? A major life change? The audience chuckled, expecting Sandra's usual charming wit. Instead, Sandra tightened slightly, her voice firm but still pleasant as she redirected back to the film she was there to promote. It was a passion project, 3 years in the making, something deeply meaningful. But Kelly didn't let it go, not out of malice, but out of habit, out of the instinct that made her a beloved talk show host. She pushed again, gently but unmistakably, wanting that personal reveal. The studio tension sharpened. Sandra insisted firmly that some things were meant to be private. And then she added a pointed remark. Kelly, of all people, should understand boundaries. It was subtle, but it landed like a strike. Kelly's smile wavered. Her eyes flashed. She recovered quickly, yet there was a shift, small but seismic. She countered with the idea of connection, of openness, of authenticity. But Sandra wasn't playing. She pushed back harder, calling the questions invasive. Kelly bristled. The rhythm of the typical Kelly Clarkson interview format was shattered. The audience sensed it. Producers sensed it. Even Sandra's publicist, shifting anxiously off camera, sensed it. Kelly insisted that audiences wanted realness, that Sandra's joy should be shared. Sandra countered that her private life wasn't a commodity. The air thickened. The exchange sharpened. Kelly tried to pull it back to warmth, but Sandra was now on guard. And what had begun as an innocent attempt at personal conversation was rapidly spiraling into a confrontation that shocked everyone watching live and eventually online. Kelly attempted to smooth things over by emphasizing that authenticity was what viewers connected to. But the word evasive slipped out and Sandra froze. Her eyes narrowed and her posture changed. She made it clear she was there to discuss her film, not her private happiness. Kelly responded with subtle frustration, reminding her that the audience had been there for Sandra through every iconic moment of her career. They felt invested in her, Kelly argued. They wanted to celebrate whatever was making her glow. Sandra's patience thinned visibly. She repeated that her work was the purpose of the interview. Kelly countered that personal stories helped audiences connect with the art. The studio grew eerily quiet, the kind of silence that signaled an interview was going off the rails. Even the camera operators paused mid-pan, glancing toward producers who looked helpless to intervene. The back and forth escalated as Kelly pushed for vulnerability, and Sandra pushed back against intrusion. Kelly suggested that Sandra was being unusually closed off. Sandra challenged the validity of that claim, sharply implying that no one on her team had promised such openness. Kelly tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Sandra demanded to know exactly what Kelly expected her to confess. Kelly stammered, trying to reframe the question, insisting she wasn't trying to trick her. Sandra called out the repeated use of the word glowing, demanding. Kelly asked the real question she was hinting at. Kelly faltered. The audience watched in stunned silence. Kelly insisted she was simply trying to celebrate Sandra's happiness. Sandra countered that it felt more like fishing. Kelly's composure weakened, frustration creeping into her voice. She said she simply wanted a conversation that felt genuine. Sandra challenged Kelly's definition of genuine, pointing out that some hosts used warmth as a tool to pry into private lives. The remark hit Kelly hard. She defended herself, saying she asked questions out of real curiosity, not manipulation. Sandra wasn't convinced. She reminded Kelly that genuine curiosity included respecting boundaries. Kelly pushed back again, saying that agreeing to appear on the show meant participating in its spirit of openness. Sandra argued that openness didn't mean giving away pieces of herself she didn't want to share. The studio felt like an emotional battleground, Sandra guarded and firm, Kelly wounded but stubborn. And somewhere along the way, both women lost control of the tone. Slipping deeper into territory neither had expected to enter on daytime television. In an attempt to regain control, Kelly abruptly shifted gears. She offered to talk about the film, asking Sandra what it was about. Sandra hesitated but answered. It was a story of profound loss and rebuilding. Kelly nodded with a cool smile. And then came the question that sent the room temperature plummeting. She asked Sandra whether she drew from personal experience while preparing for the role. Sandra froze. The color drained from her face. She stared at Kelly with disbelief, realizing the question was a backdoor route to the same territory she'd been avoiding all along. Kelly maintained a falsely sweet tone, insisting she was asking about Sandra's craft as an actor. Sandra's voice trembled with anger as she accused Kelly of knowing exactly what she was doing. Kelly kept pressing, saying she was just trying to understand the authenticity behind the performance. The room felt electrified, an emotional battlefield with millions of invisible spectators. Finally, Sandra stood up. Calmly, deliberately, she announced she was done. Kelly's facade cracked completely. She shot up from her chair, challenging Sandra, accusing her of walking away because she didn't want to confront real questions. Sandra turned fully to Kelly, calling her a bully, calmly. But the impact was devastating. The words sliced through Kelly's defenses. She flinched, visibly shaken. Kelly insisted she cared about every guest, that she wasn't exploiting anyone, that she wanted connection. Sandra countered that Kelly wasn't trying to connect. She was trying to create a viral moment. Kelly's voice trembled with emotion, but she pushed back fiercely. She insisted that Sandra's struggles inspired millions, and withholding them was robbing people of connection. Sandra, now ice calm, explained that she didn't owe anyone her trauma. That privacy was not selfishness. That refusing to perform pain didn't make her dishonest. Kelly, teary and fragile, argued that vulnerability wasn't performance. It was truth. Sandra countered that manipulating someone to reveal personal wounds was not compassion. It was exploitation. Kelly, desperate, suggested that Sandra was afraid to be vulnerable, that hiding from her truth was hurting her. Sandra recoiled. The accusation cut deeply. Her voice quivered with rage as she accused Kelly of weaponizing pop psychology, guilt, and shame. Kelly stepped closer, tension thickening again. Sandra told her she had no right to dissect her pain, her boundaries, or her healing process on national television. The final minutes of the clash felt like slow-motion chaos. Kelly insisted she wasn't psychoanalyzing Sandra, but simply asking her to be honest. Sandra's eyes blazed with disbelief. She accused Kelly of pushing, pressuring, manipulating, of trying to break her open on camera. Kelly's voice cracked again as she insisted she only wanted a real moment. Sandra countered that realness wasn't something hosts could demand. It had to be offered willingly. Kelly's emotional restraint finally unraveled. She declared that she only wanted to know the real Sandra, not the polished Hollywood version. Sandra responded sharply, saying that Kelly had spent the entire interview trying to override her boundaries rather than respect them. The back and forth intensified, each woman emotionally exhausted yet unable to step back. Kelly argued that Sandra's reluctance to open up was the real issue, that hiding behind privacy was a way of staying disconnected from herself. Sandra fired back that boundaries weren't walls, they were self-protection, and Kelly had no right to question them. The audience sat frozen. Some leaned forward. Others recoiled. The tension was suffocating. Sandra's voice trembled as she told Kelly that pushing someone to reveal their deepest wounds was not empathy, it was cruelty, disguised as connection. Kelly, through tears, insisted she had no cruel intentions. But Sandra, exhausted, was done arguing. With a deep breath, she looked Kelly directly in the eyes and said she refused to be emotionally cornered. Kelly asked why Sandra couldn't trust her. Sandra answered that trust couldn't exist where boundaries weren't respected. Kelly tried to salvage the interview by softening her tone, but Sandra wasn't swayed. She repeated that her personal life was not a storyline for daytime television. Kelly insisted she only wanted a moment of truth. Sandra countered that truth didn't have to be public to be real. Their voices softened, but the strain between them remained sharp. Sandra told Kelly that her healing process wasn't entertainment. Kelly whispered that she understood pain. Sandra acknowledged that, but insisted understanding did not grant entitlement. The studio remained eerily silent as Sandra delivered her final words: firm, calm, devastating. She said that Kelly's desire for vulnerability had crossed into coercion, and that real connection was impossible without respect. Then Sandra turned. One step, another. The audience held its breath, and she walked off the stage, leaving Kelly standing alone under the harsh studio lights, stunned, emotional, and grappling with a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years.